Or none of your children.
I know, we're gonna keep talking.
We're live now. Call this emergency board to order, and if there is follow along for this meeting, may be found online at aoa.vermont.gov/revenue. We'll take up agenda item number 1, the private activity bond allocations for calendar year 2024. I'd like to invite Scott Baker up from the Treasurer's Office to present this stuff.
Good afternoon. So the federal tax code classifies state and local bonds as either governmental bonds or private activity bonds. The bonds that the state issues for the Capitol Hill projects are governmental bonds. The private activity bonds are for projects that benefit private entities, and the tax code allows the issuance of a certain number of private activity bonds for each state for each year. IRS Revenue Procedure 2023-34 spells out the amount of private activity bonds for 2024 for each state, which is the greater of $125 per person or a minimum of $378,230,000. So Vermont gets about 4.5 times the per person amount, which is good. There are 4 constituted and eligible issuing authorities. The Treasurer's Office has spoken with those 4, and we have 2 motions to propose. The first is for the emergency board to allocate the Vermont private activity bond cap of $378,230,000 for calendar year 2024 as follows: $60 million to the Vermont Economic Development Authority, $20 million to the Vermont Bond Bank, and the remaining $298,230,000 to contingency. The other 2 authorities, Vermont Housing Finance Agency and Vermont Student Assistance Corp, is not asking for any at this time. They're able to carry forward any unused amount for 3 years, so anything they're issuing, they're using past category. That's the first motion, and the second motion is for the emergency board to grant the Vermont Bond Bank the authority to assign any portion of its 2024 allocation to one or more governmental units as defined in 24 VSA section 4551. And that's so that they can give it to any municipality or agency. They can use it without having to go through the bond bank if necessary. So I noticed online that looks like the attachment for the motion were cut off. If you heard it, exact motions.
No, this is good.
So the first proposed motion would be to allocate the $378,230,000 of cap to $60 million to VITA, $20 million to the bond bank, and the remaining $298,230,000 to contingency.
I'll move to allocate Vermont's private activity bond allocation of $230,000 for calendar year 2024 as follows: Vermont Economic Development Authority, VITA, $60 million, Vermont Bond Bank, $20 million, and the rest will be held in contingency.
Are there any questions? Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Further discussion? All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The ayes have it. We have approved the first motion.
Thank you. And the second proposed motion is to grant the bond bank the authority to grant any of their bond cap to one or more governmental units, as defined in 24 VSA section 4551.
I'll move to pursuant to authority under 32 VS 3992 that the emergency board grants the authority to the Vermont Bond Bank to assign any portion of its 2024 private activity bonds dealing to one or more units as defined in 24 VSA 4.5.
There's a second,
Second.
further discussion? All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The ayes have it, and you approve the second motion. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Pick up agenda item number 2, the official state Medicaid report. No, the fiscal office will present the report.
Thank you. For the record, Noel Langwell, joint fiscal officer. I was joking around with Scott that he and I are light appetizers towards the heading meal, so. So I'll keep this brief. As you know, we come before you twice a year. In July, we present the Medicaid year-end report, which is just informational. Then in January, we present you with the Vermont Medicaid program estimated caseloads and the estimated per member per month expenditures for fiscal year 24-25. Just like Tom and Jeff have been working together for a really long time, this particular consensus group has also been together for over 10 years. So it consists of the HS, DIVA, DAPO, with the big difference being that Stephanie now wears a different hat. I was going to say the wrong side. As you know, we do our best to make estimates based on the best information we have. The past several years have been quite a bit wonky because of the COVID-19 public health emergency and the impacts of the temporary continuous enrollment with the eligibility redeterminations that ended in March 23. States had 14 months to normalize their eligibility and enrollment processes. As at the end of the calendar year, DIVA had reviewed approximately 60% of the Medicaid population. The decreases are where we'd expect them to be. General adults, general kids, new adults. Conversely, we anticipate some modest increases in the premium assistance and the cost sharing programs. Not only are we seeing movement on and off the Medicaid program, however, we're also seeing the dynamic movement within the program. For instance, children moving to adult megs, general adults moving to age-applied disabled, age-applied disabled moving to dual. So there's a lot of movement within it as well. That does affect the PMPMs, but we're not really expecting a big change in the PMPMs across the board. Total spend will be approximately $2 million gross, mostly due to the annualized result of this unwinding. Most of it, however, is going to be in new adult, which is a lower match rate. So we're not going to see as much general fund savings as we normally would in a normal match because of the higher match rate in new adults. So before you have motion based on our estimates.
Any questions for Nolan? You have a motion?
Well, I just an observation. It looks like obviously, we're seeing the impact of getting redeterminations back in place. It's interesting that some of the PMPMs projected for FY25 have been lowered a bit. For example, AABD, and there are a number of them. I'm sure that's based on actual expenditure utilization, but it's kind of interesting to see that in fact it's a little bit less. Just more of an observation than anything, but it does show obviously the role that these state programs play in providing healthcare to Vermonters, even with the redeterminations. So that's just my only comment as I'm looking at your P per member per month. I mean, you throw around terms, but that's what it means. So I would move, if we want a motion, but perhaps that's premature.
Make a motion?
Unless, well, we can always have discussion. I would move to accept the Vermont Medicaid program estimated caseloads and estimated per member per month expenditures for FY24 and 25, as explained in materials.
Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion?
I guess I'm actually wondering, Nolan, how much is it down from 23? Or is it down from 23?
It's
Sorry if you don't have that.
I was prepared to talk about that, but I don't have it on me, so I have to get you an answer on that. I apologize.
What was the length of time that we went without doing redeterminations? It was several
3
years, 3 years.
It was 2020.
So it's been, it was came in with COVID, so it's a long period of time not to be making changes. People move, people actually move from from a child status into adult, so there's a lot of moving pieces here.
Further discussion, any other questions? All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Guys have it, and you've passed the motion. Thank you. Now for the main course, we'll have the official state revenue estimate and invite the Karen Tom Tibet to present.
New perspective.
Yeah.
Again.
But familiar faces.
Yeah. Yes, yeah. Glad to see it a different one.
How 6 months flies right by, doesn't it? Well, despite all the pessimism about this time last year, I think you probably all recall that people who practice what we practice, versus 2/3 of them were saying that within a year, we thought the economy would be in a recession. And here we are a year later. Economy's still making forward progress. Inflation is in fact coming down. Unemployment rate in Vermont is near a historic low. It's below 4% nationally, close to 4% nationally. We don't see that very often. I think you got it back to the 1960s. I think the Fed's tightening cycle appears to be over. I mean, there are some other things that are going on outside of their short-term interest rate policy. But by and large, that resulted in basically technical correction. What I would call a technical correction to our forecast of last summer. The numbers are, pretty small in the scheme of things. For 2024, we're projecting a $29.3 million increase in general fund. In the education fund, the number's a little bit smaller, but it's the same direction. It's up 9.7%, just about the same percentage that the 29.3 million for 2024 is for the general fund. But we have some things going on in the transportation fund where we actually reduce the staff recommended consensus by about $5.1 million. That's about 1.7%. But overall, the nearly $30 million that we were up in the first half across the general transportation, even though transportation was down in the ed fund, looks like it's going forward into the second half of the year. So that's why we felt comfortable with that adjustment. It's $33.8 million across all three fund aggregates that we forecast. Obviously, we only forecast part of the education fund. We don't forecast as part of this process the property taxes and all the other things that were associated with it. Healthcare is basically about the same. General fund healthcare revenues up $2 million in 2025. So when we look at the general fund change with healthcare adjustments, a little bit less for 2024 and 2025, and then as we get out in the out years, it increases a little bit. So it's pretty tame. I think it appropriately reflects what's going on as we're moving beyond COVID now. We still have money in the pipeline that's been appropriated, but isn't going to be spent until we get to the end of 2026, I think, right? Yeah. So that's still obviously going to have an impact. But we are getting to the point where the economy is going to have to respond to good old underlying fundamentals. I think when we look at the risk profile, I think it's getting pretty more evenly balanced in terms of the possibility of an upside or a downside. And so the thought is that, again, this is just a technical adjustment, basically nothing major, but the economy continues to perform. And now the interesting thing is, if you look at the Wall Street Journal survey of economists, the percentage of economists has fallen from in the high 60s to the high 30s. It's at 39%, as they're in the January forecast. And so considering how good they were last year at this time, maybe this is the time we have to start worrying about the economy. It's a recession.
So your
That's a
message,
share.
your message is no matter what, we should worry about it.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that's the share that expects a recession.
Yeah.
Within a year.
Within a year.
Yeah, so, you know, if we look at the profile of things, obviously driving the 24 upgrade is personal income. It's up about $37 million in terms of what we were forecasting last summer. It's also been a pretty good year for consumption, as we see in the national news stories. You know, the news story yesterday was there was all this concern going into the holiday retail season about people were running out of their stimmies and savings were coming down, and lo and behold, we got another positive consumption report yesterday on the U.S. economy. So our consensus revenue forecast reflects that. We have about $11.5 million increase in the sales and use tax. We have a little bit of a bump up in the lottery, but we cut the net interest by a little bit relative to what we were talking about last July.
Yeah, and that's purely technical.
Right.
There's, you know, that's just new information that we had. Modeling that has not been something when it was $1 or $2 million a year that we spent a lot of time with.
Mhm.
And now that it's so huge, we're working closely with the treasurer and trying to better anticipate and build models that reflect even a small change in interest rates. The yields that they get will be significant. And so that's more robust. And I still think the next round, there'll probably be technical changes as we get more information. There is a chart on this, I'll just give you an idea.
Bank balances.
This page, yeah, bank balance is page 32. On
It's
this.
page 8 on mine at the bottom.
Okay,
Yep.
but did you do seasonal? Oh, it's the same chart.
We got the same chart.
Okay, so,
Well, that's good.
that is good, yeah, that is.
I don't know,
Yeah.
it's forecast in a separate presentation.
That's right, that's right. Well, this is the first thing, you know, so this is the raw data is that very thin blue line that's on there. That's just like the monthly, every month, if you know, average the balance, that's what it would be. And you see how there's sort of a regular pattern to that. And that's why we seasonally adjust it, so you can tell. Like at the very end, that thin blue line drops down. But after you seasonally adjust it, it actually would be a little bit higher for that time of year. It's just because of the way the timing of when money comes into the state and when it goes out. So it's still pretty high, but it's come down from the peak, and it'll keep coming down. The forecast has it going down, but that too is something, you know, we'll try to calibrate. So interest rates are coming down, and the balances are coming down, and that's a feature in the forecast going forward. So we talk about temporary money and so-called permanent money. That's not a 1 year, you know, temporary thing, but over a few years, it's going to come with.
And there's a lot more active management going on than there was in the past.
Yeah.
Because there is a lot of money in our bank accounts. The treasurer's office has been successful in negotiating better rates. We're also, because of the flow of the money that came in versus when it goes out from the pandemic, we have more money available to do longer term deposits, which yield higher rates. And you know, so we always are looking at what we have out there when they mature. I think we have one fairly significant CD that's going to go across June 30th. So, you know, the interest is being earned now, but it's not going to actually come to us until after the start of the next fiscal year. So we're looking at all those kinds of things to try to get a better understanding of what's going on, while at the same time understanding that we don't have a lot of complete data. And we're trying to be very careful to be conservative in the way that we come across with the numbers. And, you know, I've been doing this over 30 years, and I never thought I'd be able to sit here and say, you know, the fourth largest general fund revenue source now is net interest. That was a long time coming.
But at the same time, we just have to pay attention to this. I mean, the vast majority of this was money received from the federal government.
Yes,
For all these programs that we're doing, and we're going to be spending that down.
right.
Now, the net interest you're talking about is great, but as we keep spending the principal, the interest will draw down as well.
Yeah.
Net interest, right?
absolutely.
And we just want to make sure, like, I don't know if it's a footnote, I'm sure you'll explain it in 20 years when you're here, that it was this high because of this action. And
Oh, yeah.
the sky isn't falling because we're using our cap reserve, because it's there for a purpose.
That's right. In fact, you're obligated to spend them or you're going to lose them, right? So, no, that I think that is very important. I also think it's important to note that these kind of balances are replicated across the country from states that have received the same federal money, maybe not on a per capita basis quite as much as Vermont, but still. That represents an enormous buffer to what's happening with the Fed, slowing things down, when that money not only is there, but has to be spent. And so that spending, along with very high levels of net worths too, personal wealth across the board is, it had dipped for about a year and it's come down and then went back up in 2023. And I bet the fourth quarter, which is not out yet, Federal Reserve publishes these data, it will be higher than, it'll be a new record peak, just because equity markets came up so quickly at the end of the year. And real estate hasn't really dropped in most places and is still advancing at a pretty good clip. So those two asset classes have been growing quite a bit, and that is blunting these interest rate increases. There's a lot more private financing going on, non-bank financing. And that creates vulnerabilities too, because that's not regulated in the same way. So, entities could get out over their skis and run into problems, and then, where's the federal government to help then? It's not.
There's a lot of debt repricing that's going to be going on for the next couple of years. And that's a risk and vulnerability, particularly in the commercial real estate sector. But for net interest, just to put it in perspective, in fiscal year 2021, we got $900,000 in net interest.
2021.
2021, $900,000. In fiscal year 2024, this consensus forecast has it as 72.2 million. And then as we go out, we have a fiscal planning forecast for net interest, 19.9 million in fiscal year 2029. So that tells you, what the path for this is, and that it's increasingly, it's going to be going away.
But I hear you saying it's still rebasing higher. Sorry.
It is rebasing. It is rebasing higher, because remember, when we came out of the Great Recession, we had about 12 years of negative, if not zero interest rates and negative after inflation. And so this forecast has some elements of the higher for longer interest rate forecasts going forward. And of course, unless something catastrophic happens and it compels the Fed again to do something like it did after the Great Recession, it seems like interest rates, they're not going to be at 0 or 1% or 2%. And so as long as we have some balances, we spend down the federal funds, obviously, we still have a growing economy, and that's producing increased revenue.
So thank you. So on that subject, it's I got a couple of questions around this. It is why, and I want to take the statement here so people hear, why we've treated the kind of the anomaly of where the interest is as one-time money. We didn't treat any of them that above average norm of dollars that came in because of interest as anything other than as a one-time investment, because we know we have a good amount of money in the relief dollars until needs to be spent by 2026, which is good, which hopefully we'll make the best use of that. It's all been laid out, but it has to be obligated by December of 24, which I'm thinking now. And that keeping an eye on that and listening to two things. The Treasury's guidelines seem to change almost every quarter. And just when we think we have it, and then it changes again. So we've got some recent in the fall, new Treasury guidelines on what we can use our dollars for, is going to put a new way that we might be looking at anything that doesn't get obligated by December. And I think we've got plenty of opportunity to invest it. But the feds have seen some hints that depending on where they go with this spending bill, which needs to like Friday, tomorrow at midnight.
Yeah.
We're not even saying.
Debt ceiling, yeah.
That I saw in one of the deals that there was a clawback of $2 billion of unused
COVID money.
COVID money, and I went, all right, well.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you factored any of those risks, that besides us not obligating by December 24th, some of the risks of the feds just clawing back anything.
Yeah, well, again, it's a current law forecast, so it's not like we put in a drop for that. But if that passes, it will be in the next version. And
Yes,
we'll be trying to figure out how much of that is vulnerable in Vermont and how do they claw back and all that kind of stuff. It'll be a whole nother can of worms. I think it's an open question, how much cash balance and interest rates will be by fiscal 28. But it could be lower than what we've got in there. We're using what the treasurer is saying is their best estimate of how that's going to wind down. But the other thing I think is important to remember is that the things that it's being spent on in fiscal 24, 5, 6, 7 are going it's going to buy a whole lot less than people thought when it first went in. Right now, if you look at the price of goods like the CPI compared to the month just before the pandemic, February of 2020, it's up 18.8%. All right, so that's like all the stuff that consumers buy. And in construction and building and the like, it's advanced even more. And it's going to be hard to get the same infrastructure bang that money was intended to do. So I think that's an important thing to realize too. It's not going to actually buy as much as when it first landed and people thinking about it.
We could call that bump the Leahy small state minimum bump.
Yes, absolutely.
Without that, we would be in the great position we're in today.
Twice.
Twice, 3 times.
Yeah, so all in all with this, I think it's important to remember, even though a lot of the numbers we have on here are pluses, for fiscal 24, the available general fund, it's still a decline and not a tiny decline. And then in fiscal 25, it's a little bit of a decline, even though we're adding relative to July. It's not like it's some great, everything's doing great. It's remarkable, though, that on the employment and jobs front, that things have held up out there long. I think that's going to be under a lot of pressure in the next year. We'll see unemployment somewhat higher, but there's a lot of good news in the economy, but it's not like on the revenue scene we're looking at something that's a big upgrade or something that's sort of relative to last year, everything's fine. No, there's got to be a lot.
No recession. We have no recession in the forecast that I
Yeah, so there are risks.
Thank you for saying that
so bluntly.
This may be the first time I've ever heard him say we should.
But we have 24 and 25 will be the second and third consecutive year where personal income receipts actually go down year to year. That's pretty extraordinary. And that also implies that even though there won't be a recession, that doesn't mean there won't be bumps along the way.
That's been the challenge in building budget, because we know this has been driven by that so much, 10 billion of federal dollars. And
That's almost $14,000 for everybody in the state.
it's pretty impressive, isn't it? But for us to understand exactly how we have to do so much vigilance to make sure that we're not overspending what will be the continuing base, and how much of it is really sort of a one-time or period over multi-year, but nevertheless isn't going. So that's I think one of the things that we worry about in the budget. It's what are we building for ongoing expenditures relative to all these factors that you've outlined.
No, there is
Yeah.
kind of one part of the revenue forecast that isn't particularly bright. And that's
Transportation
Can I ask a question
Yeah,
before we move
sure.
to do with the transportation fund? You talked about still strong returns on, talked about continued growth and wealth across the country and in Vermont. And I'm curious about the mix of that when you're modeling this. What is,
like the income disparity.
the income disparity, how you're seeing that play out, where you're seeing the growth in income coming from?
There is continued faster growth and more money and therefore more revenue in the higher income classes. If you go up by income class and you look at household income as reported by the census, and the latest numbers on that are 2022, there's a continuation of about a 30-40 year trend of growing inequality. And for the state, the marginal rates are higher for higher income taxpayers. And so the state ends up getting more revenue in that situation, but there is greater inequality. And in the pandemic, what was interesting is the wealth numbers actually benefited the very lowest quintile, or not quintile, the very lowest 40%, in a way that hadn't been seen for a long time.
Is that still true?
Well, it persisted for a while, but this latest growth in 2023, as I told you, went down some. It's been more top heavy.
That's what I thought, and I saw the stock market projection
Yeah,
somewhere. in
right.
there,
And if
so
you look at
that's-
stock ownership,
top heavy.
that's tilted high. But real estate,
That's good for April.
middle of the road. Yeah, real estate is the biggest asset class that more middle income families have. And for net worth, when you look at minus liabilities and all the rest. And real estate prices have still been going up. There's some charts in here that show if the latest data on that's 2023 quarter three, but in 2023 quarter two, Vermont and Maine and New Hampshire were right up there in terms of the top growth of any states. And the southern and western states that had had so much price appreciation were negative in some cases and dropping. But that's a little bit of a lagging effect. But this is in the second quarter, Vermont had the very highest year-over-year home price appreciation. That's page 26. And just by reference, since the pandemic, the next page is since pre-pandemic to now. You also see like Maine is had the second highest home price appreciation, and Vermont's way up relative to all the other ways we track real estate. And part of that is urban movement during the pandemic with remote work options and all the rest, is that it bid up house prices. And
By urban
second
movement,
homes,
you mean people leaving urban areas?
well,
towards urban-
or urban, people live in urban areas buying second or third homes. And Maine and Vermont and New Hampshire are getting
Northern New
a
England.
lot of benefit from that. You see that on there. If you go, the next one I did on that was 30 years, right? So that's a whole different picture. So price appreciation over 30 years, those charts are 1, 2, and 3. You see, Vermont's way down, and so are a lot of the other ones, kind of a little above the middle. But if you bought a house in Vermont in the third quarter of 1993, it would be 267% appreciation, which is about annualized, what's that, like a little under 4%, and highest ones, like District of Columbia was the highest. It's the most urbanized, but it also is lowest on those charts to pre-pandemic because it had the same thing, people leaving what's a state as it's reported that's entirely an urban area. And so it was affected negatively. But real estate prices work into that. And when people's wealth goes up, there is more spending. I mean, you can borrow against equity, but people just feel richer. And so they're more apt to spend, even income.
Thank you.
But recently, if you look at the Realtor.com data, I have a chart on page 34 of listings. The average listed price in December 2023 in Vermont was $477,000. That's, I mean, it's off the cyclical high, which was over 280, but that was in November.
And our wages don't match
Yeah,
that.
well, yes,
For the
and,
most part.
and it's absolute reflection of the fact that the supply in the market is down 70, 75, in some counties, 80%. It's not uniform across the average, the median price is not uniform across the counties. But one thing that is uniform across the counties is that the number of listings that are available are down 70, 75, 80% from just 5 years ago. And that's means that the housing market is not behaving in the way that we normally expect it to behave.
You don't have people listing though, because they're locked into 3 or 4%
Absolutely.
mortgages, and to move is suicide, because whatever you buy is gonna be way more expensive.
That's why this repricing thing on the commercial side is so important, because those operate on 5-year balloon loans. And to the extent that some depressed borrowers have been able to extend their current terms to maybe 1 or 2 years, that time is running out. And what's going to happen is they're going to have a whole bunch of people that are borrowers, that are holders of commercial property, that are all of a sudden going to have their aha moment that maybe their value of their property isn't as high as it is. And that when that repricing happens, that's where we could have some more financial strains, and more significant than what we saw this past spring with the failure of some of the banks. But certainly with the way remote work and hybrid working arrangements have come together, there are some markets, particularly people who maybe took out loans where they only paid interest, they weren't paying any principal, are going to have a situation where when that gets repriced, they're not going to have the flexibility to just stay there like a homeowner is with a 3% mortgage. They have to, or what's going to happen is there's going to be a bunch of financial institutions and also a bunch of people who are non-financial institutions that have lent in that market that are going to be receiving the keys.
Yeah, so the pandemic has really skewed real estate, and it's skewed a lot of things, but it's really skewed. This real estate cycle is so unusual, not just on the commercial side, which is, you know, this tilt against office buildings. The values of office buildings are way lower. People talking about conversions. That's really expensive and difficult. The only commercial property that easily goes to residential is hotels, you know, but otherwise it's, that's going to be in trouble. And on the housing side, normally when you hit a peak, you've had price appreciation for long enough that builders have gotten in and said, oh, we can make a lot of money building houses, and they overbuild. And so you have prices going up, too many houses, and then the whole thing crashes. And it's slow because it takes so long from the time you have to buy land and get it permitted and get the project started and bring it to completion. Market conditions can change within that span. And you still tend to build out because a half-built house is
Not as
really a disaster.
And it seems like too many houses would be a great problem to have, right?
Well, that's it. So
Okay.
instead of a normal situation, then the Fed's raising interest rates to try. So you normally have all those things going at the same time. The pandemic skewed it in such a weird way. And then the way inflation shot up, the Fed's responding to that inflation. It really has very little to do with housing. And so you have a shortage of houses, prices really high, and you have nobody leaving their houses, which normally that's just an opportunity to make a ton of money when prices have gone up. You sell your house, but with interest rates already high, that's not happening. So the market forces that would cover that and adjust to that haven't really been put in play.
Or you're a cash buyer, or you have to move because of the job or
Yeah,
family,
it just
something
makes
like
the
that.
markets
That's
fall.
the only thing that you're seeing on the market.
It's unusual. It's.
But fundamentally, don't we have a supply issue? Don't we have an inadequate supply of housing? I mean, isn't that to some extent driving, we
Well,
hear apartments that, there
Yeah.
are no apartments available for rent.
well, there's been a lot of apartment construction, unlike single family, but it hasn't kept up with demand.
Well, that's.
And part of that is that's legacy of the prior cycle, where
The
it
supply.
was so
demand.
bad. A lot of contractors went out of business after that crash. And that's also classic. That's normally what
So
happens.
that's our legacy from that.
Well, that's part of it. So, all of a sudden demand went way up.
Yeah.
And there hadn't been much time for supply to catch up and prices were bid up. Then the Fed shuts it off before there can be much of a market reaction, either in supply with existing home or new homes.
It's also a function of demographics too. When you look at the size of households and the number of people that live in each housing unit, say back in 1980, okay, and you compare it to now,
Oh, yeah, it's much.
a good part of the unit deficiency is tied to the reduction in the number of people that live in each housing unit. So the housing stock has to work much harder for each 1,000 or 10,000 people because of that. And, Vermont's baby boomer heaven, okay? Baby boomers are moving out of the need for 4-bedroom houses and things of that nature. And when you have these structural frictions that don't allow people to move, or you don't have the housing stock that people want to move into downsize, they stay put, and that makes the housing stock less efficient. So
They can't afford it.
there's a demographic efficiency argument now that
Yeah, I should.
is
Or.
that is pretty positively correlated with the deficiency of the units, is the decline in the number of people occupying every unit.
Well, when we talk about a housing shortage, where you have a demographic side of it, you say, well, how many people are there that need houses? Because that's what you're weighing in this shortage. But
Yeah.
the other component is income. Because if you have a demographic need, so to speak, that isn't expressed in the market unless there's income associated with it. Look at housing in other countries, in poor countries. How many people are in one room or in one, little, and you'd say, oh, well, is there a housing shortage? They don't have any way to express a desire to have more space because there's not income. We have a lot of income relative to the demographic numbers. And so we'll be saying, oh, there's a housing shortage, but it's, it very much is income based. Our standards are really high relative to the rest of the world. It doesn't solve the problem, but it's,
And we have a labor shortage, so there's a supply and demand there.
And materials.
The income elevates, wages go up, PI.
This was a
increases.
positive forecast.
Oh,
No,
yeah.
you're right. And actually, there's some interesting research the Boston Fed did just recently came out showing population growth. And when you look at that in terms of labor force growth, also an enormous part of the population growth in New England overall has been foreign-born residents. And when you translate that to employment, so on page 22, there's a chart there that shows, this is nationally. So we start in February of 2020, which is the peak employment level prior to the pandemic hitting. And so and everything's indexed to that at 1. So that's total employment, native born employment is blue and foreign born is red. And you see that the native born employment is just about where it was pre-pandemic. All of the growth has come from foreign born employment. And in 1960, Vermont had 6% of its population was foreign born. And nationally, 5.4% of the total population is foreign born. Today, we have about 4.2% foreign born, and nationally it's 13.9% foreign born. And in New England, they're much higher as well. So every other state in New England has had more growth in the foreign born population. So in terms of addressing demographic issues too, I think that's an important component of it, because there are very few policy levers at the state level that that can really move the needle on something as big as demography. And yet this could be something, I mean, other states are doing better in our region, could be something that a smaller allocation of money could have more bang for the buck. It's worth looking into anyway, just given that kind of growth.
Instantaneous, help. In terms-
Yeah, because it's hard to go, like, you want to affect birth rates? Good luck,
Around the day.
Russia tried this.
I'm not very reading that.
Yeah,
Don't worry,
No,
that's
there's
fine.
That's right. But I mean, the countries have tried this, where they pay people more, or
China's doing it right now.
China's trying to do it. It's not working. They could put the lid on when they wanted to stop it, with huge penalties and all the rest. But they're trying to encourage growth now. And because they're wealthier, the women are saying, no way, we're not interested. Think how much work we have to do. Where are we going to get the money? But you also can't really affect death rates. And domestic migration is very hard to influence because you're competing with other states that have more money than you do. And so this foreign side of it is something, there are a lot of states saying we have enough of those, but we could, in a measured way, maybe look at some policy options that could affect that.
So in your modeling, do you look at the kinds of investments we make, such as, ensuring that new Americans who move here have the resources they need to stay here, or new housing development? Do you build that into your model as sort of investments that lead to greater growth than perhaps some other investment strategies might?
Well, it's not a part of this, because it's sort of an issue that nothing's happened in this particular area. I think that would be the what if there was a policy that said, all right, let's take a look at this, and here's what we need. Here are the things that are important. I also think that you can think in terms of traditional government expenditures and stuff like that. And I'm not saying you can do widespread volunteer kinds of things, but one of the things you have with an older population is a lot more capacity for volunteer activities and things like that. And a lot of times integrating, people teaching English, doing stuff, you could get a lot of volunteer effort in addition to what you spend.
And you need to pay people to manage the volunteers.
Well, sure,
Yes.
but that's a lot cheaper than like saying, oh, we're just going to pay for all this for every, person that comes in as a foreigner or something. Anyway, it's just something to look.
One more question on it. One of these charts is employment, and the other is really about population, right? Is there, what I'm getting at is,
Yes.
is there, are the refugees that we've been able to successfully bring into the state, does that account for if they were working, but that would count on one of these, it's not, I know it's not, it's a.
Yeah, so labor force participation among foreign residents is higher than it is for native born.
Right.
So it's not, but I don't, there is a direct connection between the size of the population and the number that are employed. The age distribution would affect that, obviously. There are more children, but there are also more younger working age people.
And it's I think a significant population of refugees in Vermont, whether it's Bosnians or but now Afghans in the southern part of the state, but they're not citizens at this point, not all of them. So that'll be helpful as well, I think, in the future.
Yeah,
But I don't think it counts what I'm getting. Not all of them.
We've actually recovered a little over 90% of our decline in our labor force. Prior from the time of the pandemic to now, but we're still not back to 100%. And there's a whole bunch of anecdotes about what happened to the people that left the labor force and those kind of things, and people that are close to retirement when you have asset price bubbles. Why risk your life? During working during a pandemic, if you can manage, particularly when asset prices go up. But we continue to make progress on that front. It's not enough because we don't have as many labor force participants as we did prior to the pandemic, but it's getting closer and it's a lot better than it was.
Jeff, you said earlier that inflation's down, but you meant inflation rate's down.
The inflation rate's down, and that's the problem.
there's only a few places that it's down, and I've got some tables in here, it's kind of interesting, yeah. CPI is broken into hundreds and hundreds of categories, and I just selected some in there, but starting on page 11, there's a list of everything that went up by more than 25% since before the pandemic. And, fuel oil is top. In a detailed one, the other one that's really high is margarine,
No.
interestingly.
Yeah.
And that's because it's made from vegetable oils that are primarily produced in Ukraine. Ukraine's a huge exporter of the vegetable oils for margarine. But anyway, fuel oil, that conflict also affected. But you see a lot of food stuff, you see a lot of energy stuff in that top, list. And that I think is what people feel also at a visceral level every day, because these are things you're shopping for frequently and are necessities. But on to like page 14, it's things that have risen in price by 10% or less. So if you buy a television today, that's at the bottom of the list, page 14. That's actually 21% cheaper than it was before the pandemic. So there are not too many things that are in that category, but clothing, apparel, women's dresses, men's suits, stuff like that. Some technology thing, personal computers and peripheral equipment. All those things, public transportation, in part because the big subway systems and things like that in urban areas were underutilized during the pandemic and haven't really come back. The remote work's affecting that. But those are like the very, the handful of things that have actually gone down in price since then. When we talk about, things being better on the inflation front, it's lower rate of increase, not actual declines. So that's.
And there's all sorts of nuances about the way that they calculate cost of housing.
Oh, yeah.
The imputed rental value of housing, even if you own your house, and
There
all that
are
kind of stuff.
methodological stories behind almost every one of
Well, that's just whiskey at home.
I was.
Let's
It's a cap at the top, it's alcoholic beverages at home, it's like number 4.
I know, but
But then we have whiskey and wine separate.
I know.
Well, there are some aggregate components.
That's separate from men's suits.
No, but
Very interesting.
these list both the aggregate categories and then the subcategories. So if you did it just with the smallest ones, it'd be a little different.
You can see how we pay attention.
Yeah, right.
And it's interesting that you went to alcohol.
I'm a teetotaler.
Sure, yeah.
About to change. $100,000.
And there's a chart that like just takes a few of those things and looks at those over time. I think it's either before or after I think it's just after. This is page 15, yeah. So, that says, where are they in a static world relative to pre-pandemic? But if you start with the pandemic back here, and it looks like the way this printed in PDF, the zero line got messed up. So anyway, ignore the zero line. It should be lower because that's where it all starts at 1. But if you track these things over time, they're wild swings. Like airline is that turquoise line at the bottom. And it went up for a while, was quite a bit higher. Now it's below where it was pre-pandemic. You know, the gyrations in fuel oil and gasoline and all these sorts of things, they're these crazy trajectories because there are a lot of things that are affecting inflation. It's not just like some general, oh, the price of everything's going up in a similar way.
And so the combination of, you know, real restrictions on the market and corporate price gouging wind up with this wild thing that
Yeah,
people feel unstable regardless of whether
Yes,
their pocketbooks are affected.
absolutely. Yeah, no, they're big supply chain things with some of them, and then others like when the price of cigarettes goes up 31%, that's not a supply chain thing. That's a very small market that's controlled by very few companies, and there's an opportunity. So, you know, you do get both. It's not like it's obvious always. You know, there's action in Europe right now with a big grocery chain that's dropping all PepsiCo products because they felt the price increases were too high. It's actually some battling going on, corporate battling going on also with it. But it's you know, sometimes you're passing on costs, sometimes they're passing on.
CPI only covers the urban population too. It doesn't cover the rural population. That's why the Fed targets these personal consumption expenditure price index.
Right.
Because that covers all households, not just the urban households.
And that had a good read. The last read on the PCE was 2.6%. But that's lagging. We don't have current.
That comes out next week, I think.
Yes, it does.
Comes out next week.
Yeah.
So we avoiding transportation, probably ought to get back to that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I kept you from other parts.
It sucks. There's obviously some things going on with fees. Motor vehicle purchase and use tax.
We'll start with the good news. The fuel tax.
Fuel taxes are spot on.
Right on what you expected.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, and yeah, they are declining over time. It's not a lot of growth, and now that prices are a little lower, actually, that will feed into negative motor fuel assessment and TIV revenues and stuff like that. But anyway,
And we've got that going on.
they're close to target. Go ahead.
And we have motor vehicle purchase and use, which early on was affected by supply chain. Now seems to be, the inventory is still very low. Now seems to be being affected by the financing costs. So unless you're buying
And
vehicle,
sticker price costs.
And
You look
they're
at
up,
new
yeah.
cars and used cars in those lists, they're way
And-
up there.
it is surprising the percentage of new vehicle loans that have a payment amount of $1,000 or more now. That's just really surprising. I remember when $1,000 used to get you a car. Now it just gets you a F-150 truck. But
Almost the same
For a
price.
month.
yeah. So anyway, obviously there's some stuff going on with motor vehicle purchase and use. So we backed off purchase and use tax gross, part of which goes to ed fund by about $4.8 million for 2024 and another $5.3 million hit for 2025. So that was pretty significant. On the fee side, it's a lot of stuff going on in fees. The 20% fee increase just hit. So all these numbers before it are free. And it didn't perform well over the first half, motor vehicle fees. Some of it may be the way mechanically we looked at the revenues that were going to come from the fees. When you keep that lower, that means to get to your number, you have to have higher base revenue growth. Some of that may be me with cash flow targets, expecting more out of base revenue growth. And so some of but they're in fees. The 20% probably is enough for behavioral change. And we see that in the 2-year registrations, at least through October. We don't have November, December data yet. We're still integrating and getting queries.
That's
And
page
new computer.
33,
Yes.
if you want to look at that. That's.
There was a big jump up in 2-year registrations.
Get in underneath.
avoid.
Yeah, to
Yeah.
maybe avoid for at least 1 year, the 20% increase.
Are
But
people
that
really
should have
that
boosted it.
organized?
What's that?
Are people genuinely that organized?
I don't know, but that.
It's a very significant blip up.
Yeah, take a look at the chart. This is page 33. And this is 2-year vehicle registrations, which we have to track because the money comes in
And then not-
year one, and then
not
it's spread it
there
over
for the
2
next year.
years, right? So you get these lumps. So when it was first introduced in 1995, you'll see on that chart, about 7 or 8% of the people bought it. Then in the next year, you lose the people that chose that first year to get it, so the percentage drops. So then it sort of goes back and forth. Then it goes almost to zero in 2000 because all the registrations then were done by mail, hard copy, sent out. And DMV forgot to print that as an option, so they didn't include it in the renewal stuff. So the only people that got 2-year ones then were ones that called up or went in person and said, I really wanted to be registered. So it dropped way down. So the next year you had all the people that would have bought it then and the prior year cycle sort of amplified that cycle. But there was also a little bit of, if you hold something back, people then buy more of it. And that happened a little bit with this. Anyway, it went back and forth for a while, but its trajectory has been generally up. So generally speaking, more people have.
And there's less
Access to that
oscillation,
over
there seems to
time.
be less.
Well, there is, yeah, that gets flattened out over time. It's more mixed. So towards the end, you see that shoot up through October, but there was a new computer system that went in November. And we don't have data for November and December because of that. And they're working to get us that. When they get everything worked out, it'll be great to have that new computer because we'll be able to query it the way we do tax and other stuff now. But for the time being, we have a blind spot at a time that would be great to find these numbers. So it does look like there was a behavioral response in that, but that should argue for more money,
not less.
not less. So the fact that DMV or the motor vehicle piece is low runs counter to that and makes it even more positive.
Look forward to hearing about this.
So we backed off on motor vehicle fees by $1.6 million in 24 and another $1.8 million in 25 relative to what we thought last July.
But we could be pleasantly surprised after we get the
Well,
data from
we-
January on.
We've identified a little bit of a forecasting bias and we've overshot it. We just thought we got it trued up and then it fell off again. So, fuel taxes, are on a constant decaying trend anyway. More EV vehicles come in and those kinds of things, although there seems to be some pushback in e-vehicle markets now. The statement I heard is, who wants to spend $55,000 and then worry if you got enough charge to do what you have to do. So, we'll be watching that as well going forward.
The other thing in talking with finance people at transportation is there is something of a concern regarding enforcement of both inspection and registration. So one of the people I spoke with on her way to and from shopping and to and from the hairdresser, whatever, looks at vehicle stickers and just sort of notes how many are current and how many not. And she was shocked at the percentage that weren't current. And so
But we don't do the sticker anymore.
That's for just
the inspections,
inspections.
Oh,
not
sorry.
just sticker,
Oh.
inspection
Oh,
stickers, so
inspection.
that's revenue that's in the same category.
Oh, sorry.
Inspection stickers on registration, yeah, we don't do the little sticker on the registration. I think during COVID, there was a lapse in, people going out and doing anything. And maybe people felt like, oh, I didn't do it and nothing happened and whatever. But it wouldn't be hard to do a little study where you just walk around, send somebody around to collect data and you have good random parking lot areas and just see how many are current, and they can pull up information on vehicles for registrations in cars, but it's puzzling because we see this in the data. It doesn't match up with what it should be. And we don't have other explanations. We might after we query the data more in different ways. But I think that's a valid open question that maybe ought to be considered.
We used to play the license plate game as kids.
Yes,
Drive.
right.
Okay, so now my grandchildren, I'm gonna put them on watching the stickers.
No, that's kind of hard at high speed because they're going the other direction too.
Our state has 3 license plates, so it's hard to.
Well, if you see a bunch of people driving like this,
The license plates, you'd have to have a DMV person who could connect but they can do that instantly.
Yes,
You
they
look, you
can.
type it in and you see
Yeah.
it. The inspection stickers could be done visually. And both of those, you know, I don't know if that's an issue or not, but they mentioned it, so I passed.
Well, I'm sure, I mean, with the labor force, shortage we have in law enforcement as well. It's
Yes,
not their highest
and
priority.
it should be, yeah, right.
And,
Right.
so that might have to be.
Absolutely.
Effect on it, but I was thinking about the registration and those stickers, and a lot of folks have said, well, geez. They're not on there, I guess I don't need to re-register my vehicle. But it'll catch up to you when you inspect.
Yeah.
Because you have to have a valid registration in order to do that.
Yeah, if you inspect.
Yes. But if you choose not to do either.
Yeah,
And
I thought it was much easier to blame the economists for blowing the crash.
Well, we'll do that.
Yeah.
right, but you wouldn't need, you know, state troopers to be, you know, going to do something. You could hire with, you know, if you had an enforcement action, you could hire, you know.
Economists.
We do things all the time.
Politicians who lose their jobs for whatever reason, you know, I mean, you could have lots of people, you know, wouldn't have to have high skill, but it could be like the meter maids. And the meter maids no longer there because they're all digital.
Right.
They could be going around issuing.
Sorry, I brought up transportation.
Yeah, sorry.
You're writing all this down.
That's the last.
Anyway,
So that's the story of the transportation.
Thank you.
No. So. We need to have a motion. Yeah, probably one of the revenue ladies should do that. Item three.
Item 3,
Any other questions?
I'd like to make a motion to accept the state revenue estimates pursuant to 22 VSA 305A for fiscal year 24, 25, and 26, as explained in item 3 of meeting materials.
Is there a second?
second,
Any further discussion? All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. You know, approved within item number 3. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
This copy. Yeah.
They didn't listen to me in Staples.
Apparently. Oh.
Agenda item number 4, the estimate of the impact of authorized TIF districts. On the education fund, Jake Feldman, Ed Barnett.
For the record, Ted Burnett, Drug Fiscal Office, Jake Feldman, Tax Department. Pursuant to 32 VSA 305B, Jake and I worked together to develop a consensus estimate of the maximum tax impact of authorized TIF districts on the education fund for fiscal year 2025. For fiscal year 25, that number is 7.14 million. And a little bit of framing with TIF. It's always unclear what to assume would the development have happened if TIF didn't exist. And what we did here is we took sort of a worst case scenario, which is all the development would have happened anyway. And if you look at it through that lens, that fund is out $7.14 million next year, we estimate. And that's our assumption.
That requires a motion.
yeah,
Does.
okay,
Are there any questions? Motion.
I will move to accept the consensus estimate of the impact of on the education fund in fiscal year 2025 of authorized TIF districts as explained in item 4 on the meeting materials.
Is there a second? Any further discussion? All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? You guys have, it. Thank you. We'll move on to agenda item number 5, the education fund outlook. There's no motion required. This information is in the education fund outlook meeting materials. Julie Richter is here if you have any questions. At this point in time,
I think this item is so incredibly dynamic and we're all spending so much time in things. Anyway, I don't know if it's the best use of our time today to go through this.
Yeah, I think it's a project, yeah, it's in,
okay, with
We are planning a joint hearing about it next week, though. Anyway.
no objections, we'll move on to agenda item number 6. Other business? Hearing none. Motion to adjourn. Second. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Fine.
Ayes have it.